Hyperinflation is the worst possible outcome for most people. But there's a huge difference between high inflation and hyperinflation. Two different things. Hyperinflation is a currency collapse, and I hope we never get to that. But if we keep going exponential, then hyperinflation in the United States would be one of the greatest disasters in history, I think, because it would just destroy the society. I think it's indisputable that the Federal Reserve has been a major factor in rising wealth inequality in the United States, which I believe is a major factor in the division that we have in the United States, and a major factor in the corruption we have in the United States, because a group of people now who are so wealthy beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Isn't Elon worth like 300 billion now or something? That it doesn't matter if 10,000 or 100,000 Joe Sixpacks call Congress and ask for something, because the congressmen know they can get more money from the billionaires. People are struggling, and inflation is a huge problem for them. And the Fed is not helping them. The Fed, in fact, doesn't care about them at all. I've said before, I'm not delusional. I don't expect the Fed to be ended in my lifetime, okay? Because the powers that be do not support that, because they benefit largely. But what we can do, I had smart people tell me about it when it was far cheaper than today. And the reason I didn't is I was like, well, heck, if this ever gets big, the government's going to crush it, and I'm frankly a little surprised they haven't yet, but God bless them.
What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Rudy Havenstein is an anonymous bank critic, an internet personality who argues the middle class was destroyed by Wall Street and the Federal Reserve, creating historic wealth inequality. Rudy is anti-war, anti-kleptocracy, and uncategorizable. Rudy Havenstein, welcome to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast, sir. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Great to be here with you, Cedric. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm happy to get together and chat. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Maybe we could just kick it off with a little bit with how did you pick your internet persona? The Reich Bank president, 1908 to 1923. What does that mean?
Well,
what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think at the time, I don't know what prompted me in April 2013 to come on, but I think it was the reason. I'd always had an interest in the period. Growing up in the 70s, very familiar with the way inflation impacts the middle class. And I think there was probably some stuff going on in 2013. There's a ton of QE and all this other nonsense going on that probably said, you know what, I want to use this name as as I tell people, it was meant to be a warning, not encouragement. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because all the inflation's bad. It's particularly bad for people who don't own any assets. It's very, very bad for about 90% of the population. And I don't want to see it get worse. And, for 10, 15 years, we had every central banker in the world saying inflation's too low and we need more inflation. And I've got the receipts for all this stuff over the years and I'm just, what are you talking about? There's a Wall Street Journal article from 2015 where John Hilsenrath, who was like the Nick Timiraos of that time, wrote some article very similar to recent articles. Like, what are you guys complaining about? Inflation's only, 1% or 0%. And they're out there. The comments from Wall Street Journal registered subscribers in 2015, when official CPI was 1% or less, were vicious at the Fed. What are you talking about? My tuition's gone up, my gas, my rent, my property tax, my mortgage, everything. I mean, these people are venting when inflation was 1%. So imagine what they feel like with inflation at pushing 3%, and it's over their first of all, the 2% is made up. It's like Kashkari pulling $700 out of his rear back in '08 in Paulson. They just picked a number, and so 2% is their number, but that's not their statutory requirement. It's zero. It's stable prices, which is not what we've had. So anyway, inflation really bugs me, and on CNBC, which I have on as white noise a lot. I've had it on forever. There's a constant parade of billionaires and discredited economists, academic economists, who come on and say, inflation's no big deal, or we should have a 4% target, and of course, this is all, you get into the whole other issue of CPI is a joke. I mean, for 25 years, the CPI said that new and used car prices didn't go up at all because they introduced something called hedonic quality adjustments probably 30 plus years ago. Um, as Grant Williams says, every adjustment they've ever made to CPI is to make it lower. They've never made any adjustments that make it higher. I think they have a health insurance thing they did in recent year or two, where they said that health insurance, which is my single biggest expense, um, is actually down like 34% or something. It's absurd. I mean, a guy on Twitter named Charlie, I think it's Bilello, thank God bless him, he keeps pointing this out, how absurd the CPI calculation is. If you've ever looked at it, as I have, it's absurd. They have strange weightings, they have substitution, but the worst thing overall is the hedonic quality adjustments, which looks good to a math PhD at the BLS, but it makes zero sense to somebody in the supermarket line. And anyway, so this is one of my typical rants I go off on, but I picked Rudy Havenstein as a warning, not as encouragement, but it looks like for a lot of people, it's almost what they're shooting for. Now, hyperinflation is the worst possible outcome for most people. There's very few financial hyenas. I mean, I'm sure Ken Griffin would do very well in a hyperinflation, but it's very bad for most people. But there's a huge difference between high inflation and hyperinflation. Two different things. Hyperinflation is a currency collapse, and I hope we never get to that. But if we keep going exponential, the reserve currency forgives a lot of sins, but maybe, and I remember books from the 70s about the death of the dollar. So but it's what's the Stein's law? If something cannot go on forever, it will stop. So I don't know if it's in 5 years or 50 years, but it will stop. And then hyperinflation in the United States would be the greatest disaster one of the greatest disasters in history, I think, because it would just destroy the society. As every single contemporary account of Nazi Germany that I've read, and I've read dozens, shows that there's an absolute 100% link there's a direct line between the hyperinflation and the demoralization of the German people and the rise of Hitler. His push was in 1923 at the peak of the hyperinflation. Now, there was the depression in the 30s, and that certainly didn't help things. But the morality of the German people, the absurdity of life that the hyperinflation showed them, led them to take a chance on this guy that ended up responsible for the death of tens and tens of millions of people. So, these things start small. I'm trying to I just want to educate people. I for 30 years I've been sending emails and stuff out to friends of news articles and things because I was shocked by how many of my friends, very successful, educated, hardworking businessmen or whatever, they had no idea what's going on with the Fed. They couldn't name the Fed president back then. They had no idea about how inflation. They just don't know. And your average person has no idea how is the Fed's involved. As I sometimes people say, what about Congress? And I go, yeah, I pick mostly on the Fed because most people have no idea what the Fed is or does. And they don't know its role in the kleptocracy, which is huge. As Kevin Warsh just pointed out in an interview a couple of weeks ago, the Fed is the one who said to Congress, spend whatever you want to spend because we're going to have zero rates and we're going to buy your bonds up. So, Warsh is a Fed insider, but he's basically been saying what I've been saying for years. The Fed is like the Congress's drug dealer. It enables their profligacy. Ultimately, the problem is with Congress, but there's tons of people that go after Congress. So I try to educate and amuse, both myself and the people that follow me. And so that's why I try to throw in a lot of humor. But the Fed is bad for most Americans. And I just point that out. And I think I've made a little bit of a difference. I think there's a lot more people who see the scam now than did 11 years ago. So anyway, that's sorry to just go
that was
on.
Awesome.
I'm passionate about this. So there you go.
That's great. And so, I mean, in 2013, were you just as passionate about these things? Maybe were you in a place in your life where you felt maybe more like stable? I'm trying to figure out where you were in your life where you not just turned to Twitter, but turned to Twitter to educate and amuse and kind of had maybe it would seem like some vision of growing this account.
I had no vision of
not
was
vision of growing the account, but like of getting a voice out of putting out some signal.
It was an outlet for me. It was
Yeah.
like I call it my art blog, because and I always tried to say, I'm going to back, I'm not going to just say, oh, the Fed sucks, because, I see that that's pointless. I will say, this is why the Fed sucks and have a link and discuss how it affects, normal people or do click. I always have links, I always back the stuff up. I don't just pop off, and I've had Neil Kashkari and other people like that come at me and they run away after a while because I can back up what I'm saying. Now, they may disagree with we may both look at the same thing and view it differently, but I'm not just making stuff up. As I tell people, I have the receipts. So I've gone up against some of FinTwit's biggest, Fed cheerleaders, and they don't really bother me anymore now, now that after 11 years. But when I had 50 followers, yeah, sure, some of these big guys would come after me. Like I said, I've always written, mostly for friends, emails and stuff, and so this was just another creative outlet. And then, frankly, I started with 0 followers like everybody else. I am amazed the number of people that I was able to interact with. I realized early on through Twitter that I would never meet in a million years. You know what I mean? The list of people who follow me is like a Wall Street who's who of top, the guys that everyone interviews all the time. And they're all, they're not CNBC guests generally, but these are top, these are very successful, multi-gazillionaire hedge fund guys, a lot of them, and Wall Street guys, and it's scientists and other people too, economists. There are some PhD economists who follow me because what heterodox. They don't buy the neo-Keynesian party line. And I'm always bashing PhD economists, but then I always have to say, no, not you, not you. You guys are okay. So I'm just picking on the Janet Yellen and the Ben Bernanke school of thought. Although Powell, who is not an economist, he went completely insane. He almost put Bernanke to shame in 2020, saving his hedge fund buddies and private equity buddies, just like Paulson. Just like Bernanke did. But yeah, no, what was going on in my life? I don't know. I just read a lot, and this stuff's always bouncing around in my head. And I thought, oh, I can just type. It's like a little post-it note, And I use my account, both my Substack and my old emails and the Twitter as a resource. I am always searching my old stuff because I'll be like, someone will talk about, Tim Geithner or something, and I'll go, oh my God, yeah, I remember when what was that? And I'll have to search for keywords, and I'll find something I wrote. I have emails going back, 30 years almost. And so I'll find some reference there, and people are like, wow, how'd you remember that? I go, you just got to remember keywords, what to search for. As far as the account, it's just, I never cared about building up, that's so big now on Twitter. It's like, oh, build up a bunch of followers and get paid by Elon and stuff, which I don't. I do not get paid by Elon. For me, it was like, I'm just going to do what I do. If you can't please everyone, then you got to please yourself. And sometimes I post that song because and so that's what I do. And of course, as I joke, I post stuff that I wish other people would post, stuff that I want to read, and sometimes it's very, obscure references I make or something like that. That's for my benefit. If anybody else gets it, that's great too, and I think some people appreciate that and some don't. But yeah, it's been great. Some of the people I've met that I never would have been in their orbit, and I can email all sorts of people, some of whom you've interviewed and that I never would have been able to reach. And it's like 6 degrees of separation too, or 2 degrees of separation. Like if I ever wanted to get a hold of, I don't know, some famous guy, I'd probably just say, hey, Dave, call him. Dave, call him. You interviewed Dave, call him. Hey, Dave, can you hook me up with this guy, or to give him, send him my message or something? So I'm like, I could probably get a message to Trump in like 3 tweets, or 3 guys, or two or three guys, so that's kind of cool. I don't abuse that. And I almost never, do anything like that, but I'm humbled by the intelligence and the experience and wisdom of my followers too, and I learn a lot from them, and I appreciate it. And thank you guys, all of you, for putting up with me. So
yeah,
hey.
Likewise sentiment, and the generosity of followers and colleagues or peers on the internet, sort of internet friends. What's interesting there? I remember going through 2008. Even growing up, someone who really was into finance and economics, and trying to figure that stuff out. I always wondered what it would be like to be a Geithner or a Bernanke, and so
Yeah,
the ability to have all that power and to make the decisions, and they're always framed as geniuses, so that would always look good. And then I remember growing up and being like, these guys are crooks.
yeah,
This is this criminal. They're just helping their friends. Like,
yeah,
like who wouldn't do that and get to be called smart and make a lot of money along the way doing it. Um,
absolutely.
but from 2013 to now, 2024, 11 years later, like in terms of hyperinflation, maybe how much we like even considering hyperinflation, like what probability would you put on hyperinflation in America in 2013? And maybe what probability would you put it at now?
Well, I made it very clear that I was in 2013 and around that time that I was not predicting hyperinflation, as a number of people were around QE. I just, as the way I put it is, uh,
But I mean in the long future, like,
well, it's going to, in the long future, it's inevitable. It's
right.
inevitable. I mean, unless you get some sort of major reform. But I mean, inevitable, these guys are super good at kicking the can down the road.
Mm,
So, like I said, it could be 50 years. It's been 50 years, death of the dollar. Here's the thing: the reserve currency status of the United States is a incredibly huge advantage. I mean, as I joke with people, I still accept dollars. I mean, everyone's like the dollar's trash. I go, yeah, no, I got a book from 1979 that says the dollar's going to zero. So, no, I don't buy that. I do not foresee hyperinflation in the U.S. in my, I hope to God, my long lifetime. But I think it's definitely a possibility, and we shouldn't discount that and just say, oh, well, we're the US, we're different. It can never happen here. Because, the Germans back in the 20s, they were a big power. Well, they screwed up in World War One, but they were a big, powerful nation, and a lot of people were holding German marks. International investors were holding massive amounts of German marks right up until 22, 23, when the whole thing went to hell. So we just got to be careful. We're not any smart. Bernanke, Powell is not any smarter than the guys at the Reichsbank back in 1920s. These guys were all very smart. It's the hubris and the numbers are so much bigger now. I mean, it's ridiculous. But and as to your question, I'm not predicting hyperinflation in the United States. Now, could it happen in other countries first? I would certainly expect it would happen in other countries before it happened to the United States. Um, so there you go. Yeah, I think long run it is a concern, a real concern. But in the long run, we're all dead, as Zero Hedge or Keynes or somebody said. So
in terms of maybe the great financial crisis, and I looked at maybe 2020 as a very similar event,
mhm.
at least from the capital markets perspective and credit and liquidity. My gut at the time was like, this is probably, a similar moment, meaning that they can kick the can for another maybe 8, 10, 12 years after this.
Sure.
And what do you think? Like, where do you think we are
Well,
now? Like, what?
well, okay, the two main things for me, like Ben Hunt one time asked, well, when did you get radicalized?
Hey, Bitcoiners, invest in Bitcoin with confidence. Why do I recommend River? River is the best place to build your Bitcoin wealth, and they offer zero fee on recurring buys. Proven full reserve custody. Earn 3.8% interest on cash paid in Bitcoin. Put your cash to work and earn Bitcoin. Cash is FDIC insured, no hidden fees or minimums, and withdraw your cash at any time. River makes it simple and secure to save your wealth in Bitcoin. Get $100 when you sign up and buy Bitcoin on River at river.com/matrix.
And for me, it really was the Iraq War, watching how Hurricane Katrina was handled, and 2008. And those things combined to make me think that, the last thing on the minds of our leaders was America first, to steal I think Reagan used it before Trump, but and that bugged me. And I've called years ago, I called the 2008, thing a coup. It was a bankster coup is what I call it. And I get almost no pushback on that because people kind of go, yeah, I guess that's what it was. I mean, they shoveled 700. I mean, like I said, there's in Andrew Ross Sorkin, who is a Wall Street cheerleader, but his book Too Big to Fail, um, it's a bad book because it paints the arsonists as fire marshals. But there is a line in there where, like, Kashkari and Paulson are talking about how much money should TARP be. And what about $1 trillion? And then they said, no, we'll get killed. We can't do $1 trillion. And then I don't know if it was Neil, I'd have to look at the quote again, said, well, what about 700 billion? And they go, okay. I mean, that they literally, and then there's a line that Sorkin wrote that said, even Kashkari laughed at the absurdity of it all.
It was a
So,
political calculation, not even anything
yes.
related to it
Yeah,
was,
no,
how
no,
much could we grab and get away with?
TARP failed on the first vote, and it was like a three-page bill, including a Section 8, which, if you look up Section 8 of the original TARP bill, said that this bill is not reviewable by any agency or court of law. In other words, it was it was like giving Pfizer immunity. It was like you cannot question this bill. So the bill failed, rightly so, because my understanding is, from my memory at the time, the congressman saying their calls were 300-1 against the bill. Okay, because America was mad. America was mad, and a lot of them getting foreclosed on, things like that. And these guys are going to just give these guys $700 billion. So then they added, I forget how much it was. It was like over 400 pages of pork. Tax exemptions for arrow shafts made in, certain states and stuff. I mean, I have all, over the years, I've got all this stuff out there. And it passed. And then, because Bush, if you remember, gave a speech saying, well, if this doesn't pass, then, your banks are going to close and you're going to lose your job and your stock market's going to fall. Well, every single thing Bush warned about happened anyway after the TARP bill passed. But Wall Street bonuses were saved. They paid, okay, so TARP money is fungible. So TARP was the only reason that passed the second time, besides the 400 and something pages of pork, was because they promised that TARP money was going to be used to help homeowners. And what happened is, immediately after the passage, they just, Sheila Bair wrote about it in one of her books, it was bait and switch. They started using it to save the banks, not and this is, Geithner was very clear on that. It's not about helping homeowners. It was about helping the banks deal with these foreclosed houses. So I have it out there, the amounts, the bonuses that were given out from that TARP money, because TARP money is fungible. It was $700 billion, no strings. So, like, there's a Andrew Cuomo, probably one of the few things he did good was is he did some sort of report on it where he actually got a list of all the bonuses they filed. And you know for example, like, I got posts on all this, but for Morgan Stanley, which was just days away from collapse. Okay, that's a quote from, I think it was Paulson. It paid out 4.475 billion in bonuses, including 718 bonuses over $1 million. This is the same year they got TARP money. It's just beyond. So I mean, people were ticked. So the TARP was a scam. But by the terms of 2020, to get kind of answering your question, it was peanuts, because the numbers just got so much bigger. I mean, here's some example, like Citigroup, which should not exist, for really. It's completely corrupt, failed institution over the years. They lost $27 billion in 2008, and they gave out 5.3 billion in bonuses. Merrill Lynch lost 27 billion also in losses in 2008, and they gave out 3.6 billion in bonuses. Wells Fargo, 42.9 billion in losses, and gave out $1 million in or $1 billion in bonuses. I mean, again, all this is out there. But so people thought that was a scam. And then in 2020, it was like 2008 on steroids. They were doing these loans to corporations that were set up a week before in the Cayman Islands. The Fed was loaning money to everybody everybody who's Wall Street connected at sub 1% interest rates. They were just pouring money over Wall Street. And Ben Bernanke at Citadel was on the phone. Janet Yellen at the time was working for Magellan Financial. They went and testified before Congress on the need to buy corporate debt. Okay. They were not representing the American people. They were representing Citadel and PIMCO and Magellan. And nobody ever points that out. That's another thing, just to go off on this. Anyway, is our abysmal media, financial media is abysmal. all of the Fed reporters are basically, at best, they don't make any waves, because if they make any waves, they're never going to be invited by Michelle Smith, Powell's chief of staff. Look her up. They're never going to be invited back to the press conferences. Now, I don't know who picks like the White House press conference people, but you do on occasion hear hostile questions. You never hear a hostile question from the Fed people. People like to point out one time a guy, who I'm not going to name his name, years ago asked a very mild question of Yellen, and he was never invited back again. A very mild, and he loves the Fed. So there is no questioning. I'm like, hey, have Jim Grant go to this one of these meetings. Have Edward Chancellor go to ask questions at a press conference. Why don't we have Matt Stoller go, or some? There's a bunch of great Fed critics from the left and the right who would ask. I mean, I could come up with some very good questions myself, but it would never. It's never going to happen. And that's the Fed is so powerful in this country that the fact that we have no media, no mainstream media, ever holding it accountable, that's a disgrace. And it's been that way my entire life. So that's why I try and be. I mean, that's why I say I point out things that no one else in the media points out. There are some, alternative guys that are doing the same, doing God's work, trying to point these things out too, and good for them. But for the most part, we don't have any critical financial coverage of the Fed. Getting back to 2020, there's a tweet I made in March 2020 that said that sound you hear right now is the Gini ratio going up, which means inequality. And I was saying, this is like 2008 on steroids, guys. And it turned out that's exactly what it was.
It definitely, from a numbers perspective, I mean, the numbers get exponential. If 2020 wasn't them kicking the can down the road, I mean, even if it was, the next bailout's going to be like 7 trillion.
Oh,
The
yeah.
only difference with 2020 was like somehow they obscured how direct it was
Right.
to the recipients. And I mean, except for maybe PPP, but maybe that bled a little lower than TARP. One of the most infuriating ironies of that era of the 2008 great financial crisis and things like the TARP was the whole notion of these bankers who obviously mismanaged, risk at,
Mm-hmm.
such a, tremendous scale. Whether it was, they were putting the pedal to the metal because they knew there was a bailout or not, like however you want to call it. Even if it was nefarious, terrible, if it was negligent, terrible, if it was naive, terrible, right? And yet they were considered the only people who could rescue the system and manage the risk going forward.
Yeah.
And,
Arsonists is, fire
yeah,
marshals.
arsonists,
Yeah.
you said it before, right? The arsonists is fire marshals. And that was just sort of infuriating.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, from maybe we were both 14, 20, 14 years younger? No, not 14 years, 16 years younger. Um,
Yeah.
and for myself, I mean, a much different perspective of like, I was almost like put teachers in time, not, I don't, not, I wasn't, today I wouldn't be like, let's put non-qualified people in charge.
Yeah.
But back then it almost felt like anyone could do this. Like, but we just get anyone in there, but the arsonists.
It's the same
And
crowd.
but
It,
there was no Occupy Wall Street this time.
no, no. I mean, that got shut down pretty quick.
What
In
did you make of
'08.
that movement?
Well, I think it's like Barry Sanders over the years. I mean, he was the only one ever besides Ron Paul who'd questioned the Fed. But those guys, I think they were good at identifying the problem, but the solution was usually kind of eluded them. And of course, Bernie folded and is completely AWOL now, and Ron Paul's like pushing 90. So we need someone else in Congress, because nobody in Congress goes after these guys either. I actually put on the C-SPAN hearing sometimes when Powell is before the Congress, or back when Yellen was in front of Congress, and these guys they're in awe of the Fed. The Fed, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all that you do. I mean, it's almost like they don't realize that the Fed is an agency Congress created and can put on a leash or end at any time. But again, they're not going to do that because the Fed gives them the free money. and that's how they can have, $36 billion, debt and stuff. So that'll buy it.
I mean, you were definitely kind of calling out maybe both Trump and Sanders as more symptoms, of what was happening.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And do you think I'm going to ask this kind of individually, I guess, one-offs. Do you think Bernie Sanders is authentic?
No, I think, you know, I almost thought about voting for Sanders in 2016, which, if you know me, is like, that's a pretty big step, because
Would that be
I
a pretty
just
big step from which direction?
well,
Because I don't know you in
I
that
grew
way.
up pretty conservative. So for
Okay.
me, I did vote for Obama in '08,
That's
and
not
because
conservative.
no, but
Okay.
I believed his speeches, and then I found
Got
out
it. So you're
they
painting
didn't
the
mean anything.
transition. You
Well, I
believe,
was
yeah, I
so
agree with you on
angry.
that. He was a great orator. And
Oh
I
yeah,
just,
yeah, but his
yeah,
speeches didn't mean anything. And then he
right.
he ended up being the bankster's best friend. Eric Holder was, I
True.
mean, Wall Street lawyer. Um, no, I was
I mean,
so
it was like
angry.
Bush 2.0, the way he
Yeah,
continued all the banking
well,
programs
exactly. It was like the
and the
third Bush
drones and
administration.
the
Yeah,
wars. And,
I was so angry in '08 at the Bush administration and George Bush, and that's all those neocons and stuff. Like I said, Iraq War was a big thing, and then watching because I work at home, I watched the Katrina. I mentioned Katrina disaster. I think I was '05, and how you're literally watching a week later people on roofs, 80-year-old
Mhm.
people, on roofs with no water, and then you've got Michael Chertoff or these other guys in DC. Oh, everything's great. We got it under control. And that really ticked me off, because I thought, you know what, this is America. This is not Haiti. This is
And that
America.
and
You
Katrina is
know,
now a little bit more common of an event for America now. Like I feel like we have three
well,
Katrinas a year now
well,
with like what happened in North Carolina.
well, and you hear the horror stories from there. We're sending aid
Yeah.
to Ukraine. We're sending aid to Israel.
Yep.
We're sending aid to Syria. But we're not. I mean, I guess we're sending some aid to North Carolina. You could ask somebody like Melody Wright. She's much, much more on the ground there. But you're right. That gets
Wherever we
back.
send aid, though, there's so much. I think that's a grift.
Absolute, 100%.
98% of it doesn't go where it's even supposed to go, even if that's what you wanted it to go.
Well, what was it? Ron Paul is saying something like foreign aid is a way to take money from poor people in rich
Right.
countries and give it to rich people in poor countries, and that's what it is. It's money
Yeah,
laundering and
I
everything
agree.
else.
So then, coming out of we don't have a second Occupy Wall Street, which was kind of surprising then. And I don't know if we'd get one if there was another cataclysmic sort of systemic failure in the capital markets. But, then are you sort of an end the Fed person, or like what is the answer or solution to sort
Well,
of reining these boom and busts in?
Occupy Wall Street in '08, it seemed, although you did have the Rick Santellis and people like that, sort of whipping people up. Um, that was more of a left-wing movement, I think, just because instinctively left-wing is suspicious of banks, as they should be. Um, I think nothing's going to change until, you know, the middle class, what's left of it, the salt of the earth people in the U.S. stand up and tell their congressman, this ain't going to fly. But I don't even know if that works anymore, because, like I said, in '08, the calls were supposedly 300-1 against TARP, and they passed it anyway. But I don't know what the end is. Yeah, I have a whole meme thing with the and the Fed. I just put different pictures with the text and the Fed on it. It's kind of like I said, it's kind of an artistic outlet for me. Um, Thomas Sowell has a great answer to that question. What would you do without the Fed? And he's like, well, what do you do when you cut cancer out? And I think that the I think it's indisputable that the Federal Reserve has been a major factor in rising wealth inequality in the United States, which I believe is a major factor in the division that we have in the United States, and a major factor in the corruption we have in the United States, because we have a group of people now who are so wealthy beyond anyone's wildest dreams. I mean, isn't Elon worth like 300 billion now or something? That they could buy. It doesn't matter if 10,000 or 100,000 Joe Sixpacks call Congress and ask for something, because the congressmen know they can get more money from the billionaires. And I warn people. I'm a big fan of Whitney Webb, and she does great work on some of the people surrounding Trump. Um, keep an eye on them because,
Yeah, I
as I
agree.
pointed out, I don't think that your liberty is necessarily their priority. I think
Hmm.
I'm very leery of some of the people around the so-called, quote, libertarian billionaire movement. So just be
Well,
aware.
yeah, I mean, I would just be leery of any way they frame themselves
Hmm.
because I don't know how much of that is just PR and, sort of,
Well, these guys are all
pers
tied into at that level, they're all tied into the national security state. I
I would
mean,
agree. And so
yeah,
I think both parties are just sort of a pendulum swing to keep us attacking each other.
absolutely.
And I think one, not only does it rile people up, swinging that pendulum just back and forth on these social issues, but also they can get different grift from each side. So I really think if there was no way they were going to sell, I think lockdowns and the vaccine rollout under sort of a left wing admin, and they use a right wing regime to sort of lower taxes on the wealthy in ways that maybe aren't the best way to lower taxes. I'm not saying I want high taxes,
Right.
um, but I think it's
Yeah.
grift on both sides, and so like the pendulum swings to the left, and then the right is angry, and then they could do things that only the left could get away with, and they swing it back, and then they have the right. And I think right now it's possible that they're swinging back right to shove more surveillance down our throat as a
Yeah.
way of sort of national defense. But yeah, I mean, um, I got the same concerns. I think we should have concerns no matter what, though. I think we should always be these people should work for us. That's more to the point
Right.
on that. And I don't think to what you said, they're not serving us in the way that you would think if they were working for us.
Right. Well, we'll see. I'm hopeful. I mean, I've just learned over the years to expect to be disappointed. And but I'm rooting for the United States. I want us all to succeed, not just the billionaires. And I want, and I care more about some poor guy I don't know in Ohio than I do about anybody in Israel or Ukraine or Syria, frankly. I mean, I don't know now, maybe that's not politically correct to say, but I mean, it doesn't mean I don't care about people around the world.
I
I
get
would
what you're
like to, you
saying.
know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And it seems like so many times in the last, especially in this last administration, we're just hit with, hey, I mean, literally, they almost go out of their way to say, hey, I think there's some videos of them saying, hey, our top priority is
It
Israel.
was
Our
weird.
top
It was
priority
getting
is
really
Ukraine.
weird
And
with
that bugs me.
flags in our chambers that weren't,
You know what? It bugs me. Yeah, that bugs me. And and just as someone flying a Trump flag above the American flag bugs me too. And one thing I think this is one of the reasons that I have a decent number of left wing and right wing followers is that I gave up on the D versus R nonsense years ago. I think it's a dead end. I mean, we had Bush, he was a Republican, he was awful, and we had Obama, who was a Democrat, he was awful. Um, we had a first administration of Trump. Now, Trump, remember, the candidate in 2016, and I have a bunch of posts on this from that time, was very different than the president in 2016, or in 2017. I mean, he was bashing the wars, he was bashing the Saudis, he was bashing Marco Rubio for taking Goldman Sachs money. And then he goes in and he appoints Gary
Mhm.
Cohn and Steve Mnuchin and half of Goldman Sachs are in his administration. His first trip is to Saudi
They
Arabia,
were like
where he,
cartoonishly evil.
yeah, it cartoonishly evil. And then he's there with, remember that with that Saudi sphere and everything else. Now, these are
Right.
the guys that he said did 9/11. I mean, Trump's on the record as saying they did 9/11. And there he is. That's his first visit. And he's very chummy with them. And I just read today that there's going to be the next Trump Tower is going to be in Saudi Arabia. So the Trump, the president, was not Trump.
I
The
agree. Right.
now, am I sorry that Hillary lost? Hell no. And hell no, I'm not. And I said that at the time. But and
That
he
doesn't mean
did
you have to
do
be a
some
fan of
good
the other one.
things.
Like,
I mean, it's like choosing. I tell people it's choosing between Ebola and rabies. I think Ebola is survivable, but rabies you die. So it's two horrible choices. Like Biden was. I couldn't believe they picked Biden. I mean, it was like Bernie was actually in a fair election. I think he would have won in 2020. but they had to stop him at all costs because he's a threat to the DNC, and all they don't care about winning. They just care about preserving their status at the DNC, as just as James Carville. But Bernie, they all in one day, and I put together a montage of all the headlines where in one day you had basically every congressman, every Democratic leader in the country endorsed Joe Biden. He was kind of like the anybody but Bernie candidate. So they got Biden, and I said at the time, I go, this is going to be really good for humor value, but you guys haven't learned anything since 2016. I mean, there was zero introspection in 2016. Remember, it was all Russia, Russia, Russia. And Hillary Clinton actually talked about election denying. She's actually said they'd said for the next 4 years that the election was stolen, and it was by the Russians. So then Trump gets in, and you have people complain, and you hear the other complaints later. When Trump in 2020 was denying the results of the election, and people were the other side's complaining he's denying the results of the election. Well, I'm like, I don't think you should do that, but you know what? Hillary Clinton did the exact. You guys spent 4 years saying Trump was an illegitimate president, not my president. All sort of nonsense. Now you never, I mean, Joe Biden was my president. Do I like him? No. Now Trump, I'm extreme. As I tell people, look, I can be very happy that Kamala Harris lost, which I am, and still be very, very suspicious of Donald Trump.
Right.
And especially the people around him, because frankly, he surrounds himself with very bad people over the years. Okay. So I know I got a lot of followers and I got a lot of friends that are hardcore Trump, 100% supporters. I mean, almost to a religious fervor. And then I've got other friends and other followers who hate Trump. And I can understand. I mean, I wouldn't let him babysit my kids, I mean, I don't, but that's the choices we have. Do you want Ebola or do you want rabies? So I hope Trump comes again in 2016. Some of the things he said were like, wow, he's bashing Wall Street. He's bashing the wars. Let's see him come. I hope I remain optimistic. I hope for the best. I hope.
Do you see Trump as an outsider who broke?
Yeah,
You do?
I think he hijacked the Republican Party, especially last time.
Well, he definitely,
Yeah.
I think he hijacked the Republican. I mean, he was a lifelong Democrat from New York City.
Right.
So I
Right.
don't think, I mean,
Real estate developer.
and I don't hold that against anybody. I'm not for or against the parties anymore. I mean,
No.
I know how I grew up. But like however I grew up, I've evolved past parties, I feel like,
Me
especially
too.
at a national
100%.
level or really at any level. And I want to be issues based, but I also don't think anyone in Washington, D.C. should have a lot to do in my life. I mean, I really think they should
Right.
really just deal with the borders, and property law, property rights, and let everything else be. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, they are such a role in our life. But I don't know if I see Trump as a true outsider. I mean, one, he's a former president, so at this point, I don't see him as
Yeah.
about it. But even before, I mean, you could look at his history. I mean, he was going to Russia in the 1980s and making very political statements about becoming president.
Yeah.
And his background with Roy Cohn, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
And,
His
and the
mentor.
whole New York City real estate market is very interesting, and what it takes to succeed in that market,
Right.
which could show, but then also I think, at best you could say maybe he's a great businessman, through licensing, but he's obviously a great actor.
Right.
Most of his fame and wealth in the modern era comes from being on a reality television program, which is just strange. And just you look at a few countries around the world, like Zelensky was a former, I think,
Comedian.
comedian. Reagan was an actor.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to make of these people. But at the same time, so it's like, for me, it's really almost like unfathomable that someone from completely outside the system could break their way into the system twice,
Yeah.
like without the blessing of the system. And then something else. So I ask you in terms of like when we were talking about the Fed before and like how you could look at it like a cancer, but as an American, and without getting maybe too tribal or nationalistic, like you want America to do well. We live here. We want to participate in the economy. And you have like on one hand is you have at the end the Fed, it's a cancer, and I kind of really see that like life would just be better without the Fed and without people controlling the price of money. But I just spoke with Tom Luongo, and that episode's going to drop soon. But he's a little bit more of the mindset of like that's like putting down our sword against the other central banks.
Yeah.
and maybe we can fight the Fed later, but right now, like, let's defeat our enemies in terms of central
Well,
banking wars.
as I've said before, I'm not delusional. I don't expect the Fed to be ended in my lifetime. Okay. So because there's, the powers that be do not support that because they benefit largely. But what we can do is put the Fed on a leash. We can look what they did in mortgage-backed securities. They had zero. They owned none in 2008. Then over the next, until recently, they purchased 2.7. They just bought. Now they still have about, I think, 2.3 trillion dollars of mortgage-backed securities. And then and chart that up against the house price rises. They went nuts in 2020. They were buying 500 billion in MBS in like a 2 month period. I mean, the QT pales in comparison to the pace of QE. They weren't in that market before then, and then we wonder why our housing market got permanently screwed up. And with ZERP and the QE, um, the monetization of the MBS, we had, and with Geithner in 2010 to 2012, selling off huge blocks of foreclosed houses to, Blackstone and all these other hedge funds. We had a massive transformation, a massive financialization of the housing market in this country, and that's on the Fed. I mean, ZERP and their MBS buying. I'll just forgive their treasury buying for the moment. That was inexcusable and I think illegal, but as I pointed out before, even if the Fed did illegal things, Congress would simply immediately pass a law saying whatever illegal they did
Right.
was legal. So, so I don't. I think we should end stuff like that, and Congress could do that. No more MBS buying, and you could throw out the FOMC and use the 2-year yield. I think Tom McClellan, I believe it was him who's charted over the years that the 2-year yield leads the Fed funds rate. So yeah, sure. Do we need people in there? I mean, they were supposed to be a lender of last resort for good collateral at a, you know, at a not an easy interest rate. Okay. And that's ridiculous. They went insane under, it started under Greenspan, but Bernanke, he comes in, he's got all these wacky neo-Keynesian ideas, and Yellen was just more of the same. Um, that has to change. Fed has to put them on a leash and have them stop doing their goofy stuff that they're doing. Climate change. What the hell is that? DEI, all this other stuff that the Fed does. You got Janet Yellen raising a pride flag and tweeting it out. God bless her, but Americans are sick of seeing that. Like I said, I'm sick of seeing that. I'm sick of seeing other countries' flags on U.S. congressmen's bios and stuff. This is America, and I feel we have big parts of America. We have parts of America that are killing it. They're doing great. And there's parts of California and New York where there's guys they're making more money like in all the history of the world. No one's ever made this kind of money. And then I think you have a huge chunk of America where people are hand to mouth. I mean, like half at least, where people are struggling, and inflation is a huge problem for them. And the Fed is not helping them. The Fed, in fact, doesn't care about them at all. And that bugs me. And I think before we go and give aid to Syria, go to downtown LA and miles of homeless encampments and stuff. I don't know what the solution is to that, but you got people doing shooting up on the sidewalk, and nope, you got San Francisco's a open sewer, and all over America there's little cities like that and stuff. And maybe it's bad, but a lot of it is bad local politicians, and maybe that's just the locals' fault. I agree, but we got a lot of stuff we could do in America, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of crumbling bridges. I mean, let's fix America. We go before we go build some bridge in Syria that they're going to blow up the minute we leave. We look the other way. Um, I don't know, just don't get me started on our foreign policy. It's been terrific my entire lifetime.
Yeah, I agree. And I do want to stay on the domestic stuff, like especially
Sure.
the middle class. Like where is the middle class right now?
Well, for years, I there's a chart that the Fed would put out of wealth held by the top 1%, and then the next 9%, and then the next 40%, and then the bottom 50%. And so the chart of the top 1% went lower left, upper right. It looks like a NASDAQ chart. You know what I mean? It was just went to the moon. The chart of the middle class literally was the opposite. It was upper left to lower right. It looked like a severe bear market. And then even the top 9% below the 1%, that it was trending down. And then the bottom 50%, which only had, a half a percent to 2% of the wealth, that just kind of was flatlined, would bounce around a little bit. So the reason I posted that was just to point out how literally the Cantillon effect is working as a result of Fed policies, ZIRP and QE, and that the rich are getting richer. So I think it was last year, 23, and I have this documented. They suddenly revised these numbers that I'd been posting for years, the data series. They revised all their data and like to chop 10 or 15% off the top 1% and like spread it out, in the other groups. They do the same thing with the CPI when they don't like the data, they monkey with how they calculate it. So, their explanation was, well, we did a revision of our, methodology or something. But basically, somebody at the BLS, I like to think somebody at the BLS or the Fed said, yeah, these charts look so bad for us. Can we just monkey with the data so it looks better? And that's what they do. I mean, I have anyone asked me, I could send you some posts on how they calculated CPI. It's a joke. It's something that no person in a supermarket would think had any relation to the way that they live their life or the way that they pay out of their wallet. And yet it's accepted. Everybody on CNBC accepts, what do they say today? 2.7% year over year. Oh, okay, 2.7%. It's repeated like it's gospel. I mean, I'm surprised they don't take it out to four decimal places, but it's just taken as gospel. There's no questioning of the narrative other than a few cranks like me. And that bugs me. And it's not in the national media, it's no better now than it was, 10, 11 years ago. I will say on Twitter, though, um, I think there's been a huge and in daily life a huge jump. Now it's probably still a fraction of the population, but a huge jump in the number of people that understand what's going on. Um, I had an anecdote I posted where I was in the supermarket and I gave the teller a $50 bill, and the teller says to the box boy, "What's the deal with these 50s and hundreds lately?" And oh, it's inflation. I said it's the 50 is the new 10, or the new 20 or whatever. And the guy goes, yeah. And the checker goes, yeah, it's the Federal Reserve. It's causing all this. And I was like, I started laughing. I go, literally, like I say to you, don't get me started. So as I'm leaving, the guy behind me in line goes, yeah, it's the Federal Reserve that's causing all this. So, I mean, I was like, wow, is this like, candid camera or something? But yeah, it was funny. I think people get it. And that's some progress. Now, if we could get that message to Congress, that would be nice. Put a leash on these guys. You don't need to end it. You put a leash on them and get them away from all the Cantillon effect, which look that up. That I know but where the rich basically because of government policies and money printing, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and that bothers me. I mean, I've benefited from Fed policies personally. I just hate to see what it's done to our society. Okay, and I'm not a sociopath. I could have made a lot more money, but I guess the market closed. But I don't. There are more important things to me. And I've been very fortunate, and it hurt, and I care about America, and I care about the people in America. I really do, even the ones. I mean, you know, that's all I'm saying. I care about America first because I'm an American. I think America's been good to me, and it's the worst country in the world except for all the others. So
Yeah, I
anyway,
mean,
God bless America.
yeah, I agree. God bless America. So if you say, the rich get richer, and so that's an easy adjustment for them, right? That's a good ride. And the poor get poorer, and so I'm not going to say they adjust at all. That's really goes from worse to horrible. But does the middle class, do they just adjust to inflation? They just kind of just float
Well,
on? Like,
I
what's going
remember,
on here?
I
Like,
remember from the 70s. I mean, my dad was a teacher, and he ended up starting his own business on the side, a little like local advertising business, because he had four kids, and my mom took care of those four kids, and he had needed more money because everything's going up, and we ate a lot of like Hamburger Helper and a lot of stuff that was on sale, on closeout, like it had been sitting, it was past the expiration date or whatever, and a lot of tuna fish and peanut butter sandwiches. So I remember, yeah, and I remember when I had $20 bill and I thought, that was like $100 bill, and I'm sure somebody born way before me can remember when a $5 bill or a dollar bill. You know, we used to have stores called five and dimes, right?
Yeah.
And then because things cost 5 cents and 10 cents, and then we had dollar stores, and now that's long gone in the last 5 years. That now the dollar stores have things 5, 10, $20, because they can't stay in business,
There's
and
a
a lot of them are
store,
closing.
the Five Below. I'm sure maybe you've heard of it. I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah,
And
$5
I
in.
mean, I'm embarrassed that my kids love this store. You can get
Yeah,
toys, but like I went in the store once with them, and I hate just going to any of these retail outlets. But I got dragged in for this maybe for Halloween or something. But like you go in the store, that kind of store, and like you can literally see the goods are disappearing. They're getting thinner and
yes,
like
yeah,
the car I grew up with, the Matchbox car I grew up was like made of a very different material, much stronger material than now.
right,
And they're disintegrating in front of your eyes, like
right.
dematerializing in a way, because they can't afford to put things in the box for $5 anymore. So
No,
the only way to meet the price point is like to put nothing in the box. It's just and you
yeah,
horrible.
it's like reverse hedonics. I call it. They don't, where they don't they don't subtract. They don't lower the price. It's the way hedonics works is the car goes up $10,000. But they say, well, it's got these new features that are worth $15,000. So actually the car went down 5,000. That's what they do. They do that with men's shirts, long sleeve versus short sleeve, polyester versus cotton. They have math formulas to calculate how much better or worse a polyester shirt is than a cotton shirt, or how much better or worse a long sleeve is versus a short sleeve. And I've got the receipts, and it's amazing. And so the whole point of hedonics is to say that things that went up in price actually went down in price. And seasonal adjustments do that too, but it's completely insane. And I think if 330 million Americans knew how inflation was calculated, they'd go nuts. They'd riot, because it's completely absurd. It has nothing to do with reality. Most people think the CPI is like, okay, there's this basket of goods, and how much did it go up from year to year, and that's whatever the percentage is. That's the CPI. No, no, no. And they do wacky things for some of our biggest expenses. Health insurance is just completely screwed up how they calculate that. They don't use premiums. They use OER, for uh, housing, which Gundlach says, I don't know how much. Where they ask you, hey, how much would your house rent for? And there's a great Jeff Gundlach clip I have where he's like, I have no idea what my house would rent for. So it's absurd. Once you realize the whole purpose of CPI and PCE and sticky this and super core that, the entire purpose is to understate the actual rise in your cost of living.
Otherwise, they would just tell you what it is.
Right, because they want high inflation. I mean, they're very clear on that. You read a lot of these, academic papers, as I do on occasion from economists. They think that's the way out of everything, is to just inflate away the debt. You even hear rich guys on TV say that, had rich stock market guys. Let's just, these guys who own a bunch of leveraged assets, right? Hey, we have to, there's no way out. We just have to inflate away the debt. Well, but as if that's not a default. And I want to hammer this home to people too. Inflation is not only is it a tax, as Ben Bernanke himself said, it's an extremely regressive tax, but it is a default. Just as much as if you said, you know what, hey, Cedric, we owe you $1,000 a month, Social Security. We're only going to pay you $500. Now, most people will be outraged at that. Wait a minute, it's my savings account. I paid. Well, not really, but you would be angry at that. You'd be in the streets if they said you're only getting 500 a month, Cedric. But what they'll do is they'll say, oh, no problem, Cedric. We'll give you $1,000 a month. We're going to print a boatload of money to, pay for everything else that we're not taxing for. And so you're going to get your 1,000. Of course, only going to buy $500 worth of goods. I mean, Alan Greenspan himself said this, and so did Ray Dalio, who I pick on a lot. But Ray has a great clip where he just explains this. to some YouTube host who has like 2 million viewers. Okay. And Ray's explaining how, you have the bonds and you'll either get all the bonds back. You either won't get your money back, all your money back, or you'll get your money back, but it'll only buy half of what it used to. And the host at the end goes, wow, I've never heard of it phrased that way before. And I looked the guy up, he's got 2 million followers, but he's a big financial guy. And it's like, this is all news to him.
Right.
But when someone says let's inflate away the debt, they are saying let's screw the poorest people in the country the most to save the richest people in the country. I mean, there's a guy on Twitter called Darth Powell who has a great quote I love that goes, deflation is to rich people what inflation is to everybody else. So I think that's a very concise quote.
I think so. Darth Powell has been very, I think, very insightful in leading the charge on real estate.
Yes.
I think he's really missing the boat on Bitcoin. I'd
Yeah.
be remiss if I didn't mention that on the show.
Sure. Well, it
It
is
is a
Bitcoin
Bitcoin
Matrix,
show.
right? Yeah.
I try not to get into fights and everyone can have their
No.
opinions. I just think it's interesting because I think that's somewhere where someone's really well informed in one area, and I don't feel they're that informed on Bitcoin, and they're sharing their opinion
Well,
makes me not want to partake in the other content.
yeah.
But
Well,
I'm gonna try to keep the streams clear. But it's a little frustrating. It's interesting. Um,
well, let
no,
me say let me say on this on I have no problem over the years agreeing with someone strongly on one position and yet disagreeing with them on a bunch, one or many more other issues, which is why, like I said, I think I get along with left and right people too. I'm looking for common ground. I love Dennis Kucinich. I love Ron Paul. I'm looking for common ground. On Bitcoin, I should be a billionaire today because I could have bought Bitcoin all day long. I had smart people tell me about it when it was far cheaper than today. And the reason I didn't, and I should, I screwed up. I should have taken a flyer and put 10 grand in or something, or 1 grand. Um, is I was like, well, heck, if this ever gets big, the government's going to crush it. And I'm frankly a little surprised they haven't yet, but God bless them. I will never opine on, I mean, I'll never talk about why Bitcoin is this or that because it's not my wheelhouse. I am not the enemy of Bitcoin. I've been a great number of people. I think there's huge overlap between sort of the traditional, Austrian type school, um, anti, Bernanke Yellen type people and the Bitcoin community.
yeah,
We're like, there's a lot of overlap there. I get along. A lot of my followers or people I follow are Bitcoin maximalists almost, I mean, and that's fine. And as I said in another podcast, I think I said, I have no, I don't have any FOMO. If you tell me you put $1,000 in and now you're worth 10 million, I mean, I'm like, that's great. I have no FOMO, which has saved me in the stock market a few times over the years. So I wish nothing but the best for Bitcoin. I do own a little bit. So if it goes to what did Eric Trump say it's going to $1 million something, I'll have some money, that'll be great. Um, I I'm I told a group of people, honestly, I posted this too in 2017. I said, I was at like a book club and I told a bunch of guys who were asking about Bitcoin because remember Bitcoin hit like 17 or 19,000 something like that back in late 2017. And I said, look, they're all asking me about Bitcoin. I go, you know what? I go, everybody here should buy a little bit of Bitcoin because if it goes to $1 million, I don't want to hear anybody bitching that, they should have bought some and So I said, and I said that. I don't know how many did, but so I am not a crypto person at all. I'm just too old. I'm too dumb to get it. And I've had a lot of very smart people try and convince me. The way I put it is we're the Bitcoin guys and me, we're both on the same hijacked plane, and we'll work together. Let's work together. I mean, yeah, Loris Lepard, great guy. He's been one of my, biggest I follow him. He
supporters.
follows me. Supporters, and he's a full on Bitcoin
Yep.
guy.
He's been on the show twice.
Yeah, there's a number of others
Friends with
too.
Larry, and Larry's a great bridge.
Yeah,
Larry's came to it from hard money, gold.
yeah,
That's what's frustrating with Darth is like we're like you said we're on the same hijacked plane.
yeah,
He's arguing the same stuff we are. He just doesn't see us on the same team. He sees us as part of the problem. And I didn't mean to hijack this conversation and make it so much about
No.
Bitcoin. One of the things I love about the show is we can have our talk and just really go where it goes, and we don't have to kind of always talk about Bitcoin.
Well,
But
what should concern you guys, I think, I don't know, maybe not. It concerns me is the
hey, Bitcoiners, get your sats off your exchange now. This is not a drill. Thea is the world's simplest Bitcoin self-custody solution. With their module multi-sig vaults, you decide how to hold your keys. Thea is working day in and day out to bring you the most intuitive Bitcoin self-custody solution, regardless of how much you own or what your storage goals are. And they support your favorite hardware. Download Thea now for hassle-free Bitcoin self-custody at thea.us/Cedric. That's THEYA.us/CEDRIC.
Scaramucciization of Bitcoin, or the Larry Fink. I mean,
Sure.
it sort of epitomizes the exact opposite of what
The
alleged
ethos might
supposedly
have
is the
been,
ethos of Bitcoin, right?
but it's
So
for enemies. It's a neutral network. It's
I,
numbers. It doesn't care about us or Fink.
I understand that. I
I hear
understand
you.
that.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just saying that
I get
these
it.
parasites latch onto everything,
Yep.
and I don't know if it's whenever those guys get involved,
We got to be
it
weary.
worries me.
We got to be
Huh?
weary. I
Yeah.
mean, trust, don't trust, verify.
Trust but verify.
Same.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
don't trust, verify is what we say.
Yeah.
Just don't trust
But
first.
here's the
Make them
thing.
prove it.
There's so many smart guys that are very pro Bitcoin that uh, that I agree with on a huge number of issues. And I'm not saying I disagree on Bitcoin. It's just I'm not I'm not a Bitcoin guy. I have a little bit, and but I have no
That's a huge
problem.
step.
Yeah.
And any Bitcoin would tell you a little bit one day is going to be worth
Well, it's
a
already
lot of
worth a
bits.
lot. It's
It's
already
got,
worth a lot more than I
it'll
paid for
grow
it.
in
Yeah.
purchasing power forever. And
Yeah.
just knowing that, I think gives people a lot of, and from our perspective, my perspective, in
Sure.
terms of empowerment, like, wow, like one day this will be worth a lot of money.
Sure.
That's empowering.
But that's the thing. Let's say
Yeah.
forget Bitcoin. Let's say we agree on a ton of issues, but we disagree on I don't know one
Climate
issue,
change.
climate
Or
change.
maybe
Then
something
you
less dramatic than that, but I
Well,
get what
let's
you're
say
saying.
climate change. Let's say you're a full believer in it and I'm a denier,
Right.
which I'm not saying I am. I'm just saying let's just say we have a major issue that we disagree on, but we agree on everything else. I have absolutely no problem, and I'm not going to pick at you on that one issue that and frankly, if you start picking on me on the one issue we disagree with, I'm like, you know what? I don't have time for this. Let's agree. Let's talk about what we agree on. I think it's important and try and advance that. That's why I got a great picture of Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich together, like smiling. They're friends, and I say I'm looking for common ground. I mean, I could find someone who's maybe there's someone who's pro-Fed, but they're very anti bank corruption.
I,
I have no problem. Them. I don't need to attack them when they say Jay Powell's doing a good job. But I can agree with them when they say this bank fine is ridiculous. These guys are criminals and they never go to jail. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I'm just saying
well,
people need.
I think I get what you're saying
Yeah,
totally, and I really like 99.9999% really there. The
yeah,
0.0001% I'm not there is when I think that people who are trusted in one area and have built up credibility
yeah,
go into another area. Now, it's very similar like mainstream media. Like I could read an article about fishing. I don't know anything about fishing. And I'll be like, wow, everything that guy said or that girl said makes sense. It sounds smart. And then if you know fishing, though, you're like, that's a bunch of word salad nonsense.
yeah, yeah,
And you
yeah.
start to know, if you know enough, you're like, what you're saying is not true.
There's a term
And,
for that which I forget right now, but
and
yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And so, and particularly with something like I don't, outside of something like Bitcoin, it's a very precious thing. But in terms of like, I don't really go up to people in real life or anywhere and be like, hey, I got this checking account. You're gonna make a little extra money. You should do
Yeah,
that with your money.
yeah,
I really don't try to tell people what to do, not financial advice.
yeah,
But if I don't know a subject, and I think something like Bitcoin, which at least if you are interested in it will help you go away from things like the Fed and
yeah.
go away and help you figure out how to protect yourself from inflation. Even if
I
Bitcoin
support
you
that.
don't choose as your tool, but if you're out there screaming Bitcoin is bullshit,
Right.
then I think you're hurting people or can be hurting people. And so I think it's like a little bit of a moral line, like where I'm like, whoa, like now it's because Twitter is a battlefield of ideas, and people
Yeah,
are coming there, and people should not, people should take responsibility for their choices, but like people are trying to get signal there, and I think like in that case, I'm like, wow, you're giving out really bad signal, bro. Like that's just not good. And I'm like, I followed your account. I boosted his account a lot. So now I feel like, wow, like, and like I was saying, people can be wrong or not even wrong. You can disagree. I shouldn't say wrong because maybe he's right or whatever, but you can disagree on one issue and still be friends on other things. I just
yeah,
think that when there's innocent people in between you, that the ideas need to be battled because that
sure.
we're not trying to be friends. Like Dart's not trying to be my friend. He's like yelling at people I think are my friends, like and telling us
Yeah.
that we're all con artists.
Well, I haven't seen. I mean, I just don't, I'm not in the threads or wherever this is
Yeah,
going
and I didn't
on.
mean to derail there
No,
either.
no, no, no. I don't mind. Your show's called the Bitcoin Matrix. So I figured, I have no problem talking about it because, like I said, there's a lot of align. I have a lot of in common with some of the biggest Bitcoin advocates. I mean, on our beliefs, and no, I don't. I try not to.
I think Bitcoiners are truth seekers. Like that's part of it too. We're like, okay, if you let's like he hasn't really, in my opinion, given an argument that has any legs to stand on.
Well, I think
Um,
that, yeah, I think the Bitcoin people get the problem. I mean, they see the same issues I see with our monetary system. And so for me, that's an ally. And the fact that I'm not a huge crypto guy, that's okay. It's okay. That's what I'm saying. It's like you guys do you, I'm do me. I don't bash Bitcoin, but I don't promote it. I mean, I just listen to people who are fans of it, and I nod and I go, yeah, well, we agree on this and this and this and this and this. That does, and the fact that I'm not all in on Bitcoin, I hope doesn't mean that you can't be friends with me, and not you. I mean, just in general,
right,
it's
right.
because, yeah, and I always one of my favorite sayings is just pick and choose your battles, and I'd rather not pick a battle with someone where I have a like I said, my only reason against it was I figured the government was crush it. So I bet wrong so
I
far, and
definitely
I've
had that
been,
concern in the beginning.
yeah. So now it's so big. I don't know, and Trump's
Oh,
talking about a Bitcoin reserve and everything else.
I
So
think we still could fight. I think Goliath is still in front of us, and
yeah, I don't trust the
I'm not saying
feds.
that there's no battle in front of us, and
I mean,
I'm not
gold
saying
was
that.
money in the Constitution, and they confiscated it in
Yeah.
1933. So
They don't. Yeah, they don't
that's
even
yeah.
listen to or pay attention to the Constitution, and most Americans don't really know the Constitution or what their
Of course
real
not.
rights
No.
are, and they that's on purpose by design.
Well, our
Um,
educational system is terrible, which I think, like you said, is by
it's
design. I
just,
think they like stupid voters
and this is
or
my
non-voters.
both my parents were lifelong public school teachers.
Mine too. My mom,
And
when she had the kids, she stopped being a teacher, but my dad was a teacher his whole life. So
yeah,
yeah,
both
so
my parents.
and back then teachers weren't, it was pre-union. Teachers didn't make much,
No,
and four kids.
I still don't think they make like a lot. I mean,
Yeah,
you could talk about like there are some districts in the country that have very cushy programs with very huge pensions that I think are very out of line and out of bounds and
yeah. Well,
not
it's a
well
tough job.
funded. But it is a
It's
tough job. I think I think education is very important for our young people. So I'm not trying to
Well,
you know
there's huge school systems in our country that are producing their product as kids who can't read and write. Or do
yeah.
math.
Um,
And I
but that
just
doesn't mean
finished.
I think the individual. I mean,
No, I'm not talking about the
institutions.
teachers. I'm talking
Yeah,
about the
yeah,
school systems. And I
yeah,
think if you
and the
look at,
system.
I know it's true for colleges, but I bet it's also true for elementary and high schools that the ratio of administrators to teachers has skyrocketed probably in recent
That's a
decades.
huge problem. That's part
That's
of.
yeah, and
Yep.
that's where a lot of the money's going. I
hmm
just finished rewatch. I'm rewatching the series The Wire,
I love. It's my
and
favorite show of all time.
yeah, it's probably mine too. And I just finished season 4, which is all about the Baltimore school districts. And I think from knowing the people that were involved in that show, that was probably about as accurate a depiction of inner city schools as you're going to get. And it's very sobering and depressing.
Yeah.
And
I
it's
tried to.
not good.
Yeah. My parents were in like they taught in some of the worst inner city school districts in New York City,
Yeah.
and I would go in like whenever like what we would have a lot of. I was in the suburbs, and we would have a lot of snow days or even holidays that they didn't have. So I would go and my parents and have daycare or anything, so I would just go to work with them, But and so I had I have the utmost respect for teachers, and but I think I just don't like the system very much, and that's been
Right.
something hard for me to kind of reconcile over time. I don't think the system's designed well, but
But nothing's changing. That's kind of
and
sad. But we can send 100 billion or whatever to all the, all
right,
over
right,
overseas. That kind
right.
of bothers me. Not that 100 billion would fix it, because frankly, throwing money at these things um, historically doesn't seem to work. But maybe we need a paradigm shift in thinking there too, just like we do in Congress.
Do you think
But
the middle? Yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
Well, do you think the middle class? I mean, do you think it's going to survive? I mean, you would kind of say we were saying like, okay, chance of hyperinflation is very low. A lot of these things, like they could kick the can forever. Like the middle class seems to be shrinking and seems to be struggling, but is this just more par
Well,
for the course, or is it like getting a lot worse and maybe like not sustainable?
I've
Um,
seen, I get a lot of feedback from people. I think I've
I mean, real
read.
estate's unaffordable.
Yeah. Well, I think, like I pointed, largely thanks to government action, but not just the Fed, but also government policies that, like Kamala wanted to give $25,000 to first-time home buyers. Well, every house just went up 25 grand.
Right,
I
right.
mean,
Or 50.
that absurd kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are they going to survive? Well, I think real inflation um, is probably multiples of 2.7. Um,
Like
uh,
10 or 15%.
yeah, maybe it's 8 to 12, something like that. I don't think that's unrealistic. I mean,
Yeah.
I look at what I pay. I still write checks because I feel that's a good way to direct. I don't do. I try
I
to
feel like it
avoid
was
the.
8% before 2020.
Yes, yeah, and I think, well, like for
So
example, my health insurance goes up, 15% every year for the last
so I
25
guess if
years.
you
But
believe the 2 to 3 in their terms, because they never have a good unit of account or
well, it's not the
denominator.
same as a
But is it
1980 two or three. Yeah.
right? But did we go from 8 to 12 or did we go from 8 to 24? Like
Well,
I
I don't know. I don't know. Like my auto insurance went up 41% this year.
right.
So maybe it only goes up 20% next year. Is that what? Is that deflation? No, it's disinflation, you know. Yeah, they're getting squeezed, and they're getting squeezed. And even 2.7% over time is going to destroy your purchasing power, by the way, as Bitcoin people know well. So,
Yeah.
there's a church near me that I know people that work at food bank, and it's in what I would call a middle class area. And they have 900 families and individuals. These are not homeless people. These are generally people with cars, people with houses, and they come every month to pick up boxes of food or, blankets or whatever else they need. These are working poor. You know, getting back to Kevin Warsh again, he said years ago that I posted. He says, 52%, I think at the time, I think it's still around the same, around half of Americans have no assets. They had their only wealth is their W-2 income. So these are the people that are getting destroyed by inflation. These are also people who do not really have lobbyists. The very poor have, if you make up to a certain income amount, have certain backstops, have free this or subsidize that. The middle class, if you make, you and your wife make, 75, 80 grand, something like that, you're not going to qualify for a lot of this stuff. Maybe
Death
it's
by a
higher
thousand
even if you're in
cuts.
Frisco. Huh? Yes. Yeah. And of course, it's just all priorities. A lot of people spend stuff on stupid stuff nowadays, like, Netflix subscriptions or something. But, um,
But it
you
doesn't. I
know,
mean, I wanted to. I mean, I get. Yeah. I mean, it just. I don't think. But I mean, it feels like they'd be giving up a day. I have Netflix.
no, I know. I do too. I'm
Like you know
just
what I
saying.
mean? Like I just like my kids would look at me like we don't have Netflix anymore.
Yeah, I know. I know. Okay. Well, I don't be too,
And like
too
I know I'm
extremist.
wasting
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
I got several subscriptions like this, and like I'm not happy about it.
Well,
I don't, but
date.
it's like you're in this weird world where like this stuff seems ubiquitous, it
Yeah.
seems abundant,
Yeah.
and it costs us 4 times more than the utility value, let's say.
Yeah.
And we're getting 75% of the utility value is vapid to what your point is like. It's like you don't need to watch that stuff. It's not improving your life. It's not productive. all these things are wasteful, but like I think that is the
Well,
fiat matrix in a lot of ways. It's where we're all just getting grinded down.
well, it was just a
That's why.
simplistic example. I mean,
Oh, it's a great example, though. I mean, it's just so illuminating
yeah.
because it's like it is just. I struggle with that. We all do. It's just like I mean, I have to get I not have to. I get bottles of water delivered, like spring water, because I don't like the tap water. Is
Yeah.
that it's like, is that wasteful? Is that mindful? Is that
Uh,
resourceful? I mean, there's a lot of decisions that we're all trying to make.
yeah. I'm not criticizing anything
No, I'm
like
not
that.
either. I'm saying I'm
Yeah,
trying to defend these. I'm like almost
sure.
like it's hard to
Yeah.
not make these bad, if you want to call them bad decisions. It's
Yeah. But what's wrong with your city water supply? You know what I mean? You're paying for that too. Maybe, there's a lot of
I
things
just
we can
I
fix.
had to test it.
No,
I
I
don't
hear
think
you.
it's like the best, and
Yeah.
like
I hear you.
or it's not great,
Well,
and
you could be in Flint, Michigan, right? Which still is that fixed yet? I don't think
I don't
so.
think that's fixed. And
Yeah.
to your point, that's what these are all those things that we're just not fixing. And even if we did, it would cost us like 10 times as much as it should cost to fix it. It would probably
Yeah.
cost like $4 billion to cost a $18 million problem.
Oh, we'll
And that's
just
way
look at
more than 10x. But because of the grift and also just because of the inflation and the debasement of the money, and it
absolutely. It's
makes
hitting
me
the
very
middle
worried.
class hard. It,
That's
it
what that's my
absolutely is.
point. They're getting
Yes.
slammed, and even
Yes.
just to feel a semblance of keeping up with our, for myself, even just like things like Netflix would be like what I had HBO growing up, and my parents were teachers.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, so like Netflix doesn't feel different than HBO. It would feel like if I didn't have Netflix, which I wouldn't have a problem with philosophically, but like, it would feel like a step back if we couldn't afford Netflix.
Right. Well, that's the thing
But
for me when I go and go to a restaurant and not a fancy restaurant, just a Denny's or something, not Denny's, but
I know what you
so
mean.
and the price now is double what it used to be,
Triple.
or triple. It's for me it's an irritation, and frankly I just won't go back. But for other
But it doesn't mean
people,
that it's not nice to go
inflation.
out and have someone else
No,
cook and
I
clean for you once in a while or a
once in a
date with your
while,
wife or something.
right? I understand that, but I mean
But it's still, you're overpaying in some ways.
for a lot of people, inflation is an existential threat. Do they eat or
Yeah.
do they pay their rent or
Right.
their car needs to be repaired and they're paycheck to paycheck, and and the Fed clearly is not making inflation, even though it's its
Right.
first and only main mandate, is not making inflation a priority at all.
Not at all.
And what I just see a steady stream of very wealthy Wall Street types. Uh, Oh, and you got the Krugmans and the Jonathan Chaits and the Justin Wolfers and the Jason Furmans and all these other guys who basically they mock people who complain about inflation. They tell us,
Hmm.
Greg Ip, the I think he's the Wall Street Journal reporter who's
I think it's
who's
the
a
scariest thing out there. I
the
mean,
Fed mouthpiece, but he has that headline that says, what's wrong with the economy? It's you. It's what's wrong. It's you, not the economy. And Jonathan Chait actually had a headline. I think he was with the New Yorker or something. He's another one of these characters. And it's Paul Krugman is right about the economy and you're wrong. That the smug, just condescending hubris of these columnists. I see a lot of parallels, frankly, getting back to the
when
20s.
when I
There
was
was a
15 or 16, I mean, Paul Krugman was, the New York Times columnist that won, and I just the Nobel, and like there's someone to look up to, and I remember thinking that his opinion mattered.
oh, and no, it doesn't.
And
It matters.
I agree with
It,
you. I mean, the fax
it
machine quote alone obliterates what his opinion should matter. But like, it's amazing that he's still the fixture he is in the conversation and
he's
has the
it.
credibility.
He's an approved
Astonishing.
propagandist. He's in the
Yes,
club.
yes,
You
yes.
know, um, Paul Krugman, who regularly, and I would quote it at times, mocked people who complained about the high cost of living. He in 2000, he was making 50. He had in an article of his I posted, he was making 50 grand a speech to
Right.
bankers in 2000. So it's easy for a guy, like Barry Sternlicht, for a net worth of like 4.7 billion, commercial real estate guy. There's a great quote for him I posted where he says, I don't think inflation is that big a deal. I think we could have an inflation target of 4%, and that would be fine. And I was like, well, yeah, a guy who's worth has a net worth of 4.7 billion, of course he wants inflation. He wants his debt to be devalued and he wants his assets to spike up so higher and he wants rents to go up. He actually said we need higher inflation so that we can get higher wages to pay higher rents. It's almost like I couldn't make this up, if it wasn't true. It's truth is stranger than reality. I mean, than fiction. So I don't know. I see that a lot and it bugs me. I think there is way too much underemphasis on how the high cost of living is hurting Americans right now. I think we saw that in the election. I think, people were not happy. And if Trump doesn't come through, then they're not going to be happy at him either. If you remember when he was president the first time, he wanted, I mean, there's no one more easy money. He wanted negative interest rates. He wanted more QE. So anybody thinks he's going to come in and set the Fed straight, I think you're in for a surprise. He's a New York real estate developer. He loves easy money more than Barry Sternlicht does. So I am not hopeful on that part of the administration. Now, if he can keep us out of wars, new wars, and he can stop sending money overseas and try and help America, that'd be great. And we shall see.
Yeah, we shall see. I have two questions for you before we roll out.
Sure.
One, so just I guess in terms of Trump and also the United Healthcare CEO and
Mm.
assassinations this year. What do you make of all this? Do you think this is an inflection point? Do you, I mean, I have so many questions for you around this, but I mean, what's your take on, I mean, especially the United Healthcare CEO? Does this change everything for CEOs around the country, especially CEOs that are maybe in disliked industries? Is this,
I don't know. They were blowing up. They had truck bombs on in front of the New York Stock Exchange in the 20s. These
hmm,
things go in cycles. I think people are angry for a variety of reasons. I think the lower standard of living, while they see um, all the attention paid to other countries and to U.S. billionaires, I think that bugs people. And I think they feel like, hey, I'm playing by the rules. I'm working hard. Um, Yet you seem to care. It's like Americans, I think, and I've said this, don't a lot. I think most Americans don't feel like our leaders care about Americans. I mean, they care about, Larry Fink and Ken Griffin and Elon
so
Musk, but those guys are almost in that's a whole nother world. That's a category of like globalist billionaires, um, they're not really, the guy that runs a pizza shop or the nail salon or whatever. I don't think they feel like they get any attention at all, and I don't think certainly the employees of them get any attention. I've dealt with the insurance business. I don't understand. I think it's a big grift. I think it's like having so many administrators at colleges and and schools. You have this like parasitic layer that sits on top of everything. And I don't blame the doctors. I know doctors. I know nurses and physician assistants and stuff. And I don't think they're not the ones gouging. They're trying to survive in a system where, they'll
they're being
say,
judged.
well, you're trying to bill for this, we'll give you 1/10 of that. I mean, I've had some big bills before. I have very good insurance that I pay through the nose for. And I've gotten huge bills before. I mean, I pay a ton, and then of course I have a huge deductible, and then I pay um, you get these huge bills and then they're knocked down quite a bit and then they'll pay part of it. And then you still end up, having to pay a huge chunk. So I can understand people's frustration. I've been on the phone on
Do you,
hold with Anthem, so I know what the frustration is.
oh,
And
I
this
get it.
guy, I
I've
haven't looked into this guy's whole history. I understand he had major medical problems and everything. And it's a very strange
Well, his
story.
parents owned, I think, retirement homes or
Yeah, I
I mean,
haven't
there's
done
a
any
lot
research on
here,
that.
but but forget, let's not maybe then we're not experts on the
No,
situation.
I don't know. I'm not
So
an
we don't have to
expert
get
on
into
that
that. But
or
in
healthcare,
terms
really.
of, but I want to ask you in terms of maybe the reaction from just, the wider spread, it's been very much like it seems like people are happy with this
Well,
vigilante justice.
I wish that yeah, I can't support
I
a
can't
killing.
support,
I can't support it.
sort of that kind of retribution.
I
If
can
people, but
understand. It's kind of like when once in a blue moon, like when someone like China executes a banker for corruption and people are like, well, we should do that here and stuff, it's like I'd rather
right.
have a system that didn't perpetuate this kind of grift that we
Right.
have in both the banking industry and the healthcare industry.
Do you-
Let's try and address that. And I know there's always some disturbed people and that will use violence. I'm not a fan of violence because they know how to handle violence, as John
yeah.
Lennon said.
I,
Um, I don't know. I can understand
but
definitely what people are ticked off.
that's what I want to ask about. So I'm not pro-violence, but do you think people are ticked off that? Do you think people are happy that a rich elitist got knocked off, or do you think this is more about the healthcare system and healthcare outcomes?
I think everybody instinctively has had a bad experience with the health insurance company, and a certain percentage of the population, when they see somebody get hurt that's heavily involved, head of one of the companies, they have sort of a human nature reaction of good, good. I'm glad. I don't think that's all people. I think it's just some people, and some of them are very vocal, like Taylor Lorenz, nuts like that. But I can understand. I can understand. But you can't. I mean, if everybody who had a real grievance, and everybody's got a real grievance about something. Maybe this guy had a little bit more of a grievance, or maybe you and I have less of a grievance, but you can't go and just shoot someone you're ticked off at. I mean, where does that end? But I certainly understand the rage. Um,
Well, I don't believe the story, but I understand. But I'm more going at the rage, and I understand the rage. I'm just kind of curious if it's actually rage at healthcare or just elite in general. Because like I
well,
think I was surprised by like people being. I didn't expect so many people to voice so much outrage at the healthcare system.
well,
Just that
there
seemed
was a
like a real
whole
180 from a few months ago.
there was a whole subreddit uh, 4 years ago where people would celebrate um, an, anti-vaxxers who died of
Wow.
COVID. And it was like thousands of posts, and these people like, ha ha. I think it was who was the guy? Was it like was it Herman? Oh, it was some official that died of COVID after saying he was against the vaccine or something. Anyway, it was a whole bunch of glee, and I remember looking at it going, I have it posted somewhere. I can't remember the exact name of the subreddit, but it was very disturbing. It's like, ha ha, this random guy in Iowa that made a Facebook post 2 weeks ago saying I'm not getting the vax. He died, ha ha. And it was like, this is just demonic. I mean, it was like, what are you guys doing here? This is wrong, and uh, and plenty of people who got vaccinated died too. So I don't know. I mean, it was just such a sick time. But to see the glee, there's a certain percentage of population that's just like, wants to see someone else, that they
Pay
don't
the
like
price.
get really badly hurt
Wow.
or die. And I don't have that feeling. I mean, people say, "Oh, you hate the Fed." I don't hate the Fed. I hate what they're doing, what their policies have done to this country. I don't wish any violence on anybody. I wish they would disband and go live on a desert island somewhere. I mean, that's my usual retort, but violence is not the answer because nobody can bring the violence more than the national security state, and the U.S. government. So you don't want to go that route, unless it's, end times or something you're trying to figure, but you don't want to go that route because it's not going to be a winning route. I mean, this guy's going to spend the rest of his life in jail if he did it. And there you go. I mean, what did he gain? He's going to be in a lot of pain. And maybe prison has better health care because it's on the taxpayers. That might be true, frankly. So.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of it. I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. This has been so dope. I want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing your time and your thoughts. I'll leave it to you, for any, words, parting words and let people know where they can find you and your work.
Well, thank you. I know I tend to go off on rambling tangents here, and I appreciate your listeners putting up with me, but I am passionate about a lot of this stuff. I My main thing now is just let's work together, common ground. I'm very anti-war, which sometimes ticks off some of the people who agree with me on other issues, but they have a specific country or something they have an alliance to,
Right.
and that's okay. It's okay. I don't need to agree with people on everything. I mean, I learned many years ago when I was a young kid or in college, you and I can argue nose to nose on some big thing and get all heated up and then say, let's go have a beer. And too many Americans can't do that anymore, and it's a shame. So anyway, I'm on Twitter at Rudy Havenstein, and I have a Substack, which I put some fun stuff on there, rudy.substack.com. So thank you very much for the letting me vent here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rudy. Anytime.